Right everyone, it is Finn here and welcome back to another World Cup Wednesday, where today to all the Ghanaian football fans out there, it is officially time, because today I'm going to be telling you everything you need to know about Ghana for the 2022 World Cup.
Yes, my turn, assholes.
Now, of course, as you guys would have realized over the last few months, I've created quite a bit of content about the Black Stars of Ghana. And I mean, who can blame me, considering they had an absolutely awful African Cup of Nations. Ever since then, they've totally turned things around, bringing in some of the best young talents in from around the world. And obviously being in an incredibly difficult group for the World Cup, we could see something extremely special. Of course, in today's video, we're going to be talking about the national team as a whole, what we could probably expect from them, and ultimately what I believe their best possible team heading into this World Cup is. Now, of course, guys, don't forget, if you have been enjoying this World Cup content, don't forget to subscribe down below. Of course, the goal is to reach like 10,000 before the end of the year. If we are able to hit it, it would be absolutely massive. But of course, jumping straight into things, heading into this World Cup, as I said, looking at Ghana, they have an incredibly difficult group. They've got the likes of the Korea Republic, Portugal, and Uruguay. I'm not saying it's going to be impossible, but Ghana have to absolutely throw the kitchen sink. They're going to have to throw absolutely every single utensil in the kitchen. Looking at them, obviously Portugal qualifying for this World Cup, they almost didn't do that due to their loss versus Serbia, but they just ended up snatching it in the last minute. Obviously Uruguay have an absolutely huge rivalry with Ghana due to the 2010 World Cup.
You ruined my life. I'm going to bed.
And I'm sure Ghana are going to want their revenge. Obviously, looking at South Korea, I would say it's definitely maybe one of the weakest in this group after Portugal and Uruguay. And this is definitely where Ghana are going to have to take their necessary points. As I said, it is an incredibly difficult group, but I do believe if Ghana put forward their best team possible, it will be possible. Obviously, as I said in the beginning of the video, they didn't have a great start to the African Cup of Nations, got knocked out way earlier than expected to the Comoros Islands, but at the end of the day, we know the kind of quality that is within this Ghanaian national team. They've obviously pulled in quite a few top talented players from other nations that weren't getting game time, and as I said, I believe Ghana built themselves something truly special in terms of their best possible starting 11. Obviously, in terms of a formation, I think Ghana need to go with something along the lines of a 4-2-3-1 formation. Once again, it's a formation that will make sense as I start building onto this team. Obviously, looking at the goalkeeper, I believe Ghana needs to go with is I've gone for JJ Wollacott. Now, I was mixed between two minds of whether to choose him or Richard Ofori. Obviously, myself as a South African, I kind of wanted to go for Ofori as he plays for Orlando Pirates. Obviously, I've seen quite a bit of him and I really like his abilities. But I did ask you guys on my community tab and you guys seem to prefer Wollacott better. I mean, as a goalkeeper, I mean, he's even essentially got the name Wall in his name. As a goalkeeper, he must be solid. But obviously, jokes aside, he is a top quality player, obviously playing for Charlton in the 3rd division of English football. And although, yes, 3rd division of English football doesn't sound that attractive, he's played a major role in Ghana qualifying for the World Cup. Obviously, in World Cup qualifiers, got 3 clean sheets in 6 games, has gotten 4 clean sheets in 10 games for Ghana, and seems to be a very, very reliable option. Was also a huge part in them beating the likes of Nigeria to qualify for the tournament as a whole. So once again, I do believe you have to put trust in a player like him. In terms of the back 4, I think Ghana have to go with. Once again, this is where a lot of talent has really started to crawl into this team. In the right back position, I've gone for Tariq Lamptey. Once again, top quality player, we'll talk about him in a second. In the left back position, I've gone for Gideon Mensah. In terms of the 2 centre backs, I've gone for Salisu and Alexander Joku. Once again, looking at these 4 defenders, I think this is such a solid option for them. I think especially if you compare it to the one that went to the African Cup of Nations, I think they almost stood no chance. I mean, if you look at their current group for the World Cup, they are in a group with Heung-min Son, Cavani, Suarez, Ronaldo, and so many other brilliant attackers. A top quality defense is definitely needed, and this might be what Ghana have now. Obviously, talking about the fullbacks, I think looking at Tariq Lamptey, him at only 21 years old, we forget how young he still is. Once again, what a brilliant addition. Obviously, swapping from England to Ghana. Once again, whether he'll fit directly into this team, we'll have to wait and see. This is recorded about a week before the game versus Brazil, and I feel like a game versus a top quality nation like that could win the World Cup would be a true test to see how good this Ghana team could be with its new additions. As we know, Tariq Lamptey, in terms of his attacking ability, in terms of his absolute pace, he is a natural born footballer. He's just got that instinct in him, and once again, although his numbers aren't great, he is a top quality footballer. He is one of those footballers that if you just look at his numbers, he won't seem that amazing. But when you watch him, you watch the impact he has, you watch how he gets up the running line, once again, brilliant option. Looking at the left back side, as I said, we've got the likes of Gideon Mensah. Now, once again, I was stuck between one or two other players, but I do think that the 24-year-old is the correct option, playing for Auxerre in the French league at the moment. And once again, is one of those left backs that if you haven't watched him before, you won't realize how totally balanced his game is. I think he probably is Ghana's best option going forward in terms of a balanced fullback. I think he's one of those players that can totally find a pass across the pitch in terms of his attacking and defensive ability. He's not totally amazing at both, but he's pretty good at both of them combined together. As I said, in terms of a balanced fullback, he is Ghana's best option. Now, of course, jumping into the centre-back options, as I said, looking at the African Cup of Nations, this was definitely a major weak point for them. But once again, if you can get a centre-back like Salisu in there, and obviously Joku, once again, I think this is a solid centre-back option. I know a lot of people are going to be asking where someone like Daniel Amate is. Don't worry, I've kind of got a special plan for him later on. But at the end of the day, I just feel like these would be the best centre-back options for them. As we know, Salisu, only 23 years old at the moment, had more interceptions than any other player in the Premier League last season. Now, yes, I know maybe that's due to the fact that Southampton conceded a lot of chances. And I know Salisu, I'm not going to say that he's the best centre-back in the Premier League by any means. He definitely has a lot of room for growth. But we can't forget, he's only 23 years old. He's still going to learn, and I do believe that he might be one of the best options that Ghana have. Obviously, he hasn't represented the Ghanaian national team before. Obviously, he stated last season that instead of the African Cup of Nations, he wanted to focus his attention on Southampton, which once again, at the end of the day, probably makes sense, and I do believe he is ready for the national team now. Obviously, in terms of the other centre-back, as I said, it has to be Alexander Joku, who I think going into this tournament, going into this World Cup, probably is the best centre-back option for Ghana. He's been part of the system for quite a while now in terms of his defensive ability. He is really, really good. He was obviously born in France, but chose to represent Ghana instead. As I said, I think he's a top-quality centre-back. He's very ruthless. He does what he needs to do to get the ball from the opposition. And as I said, he's probably the most intelligent player in this back four and absolutely needs to be in it. Now, of course, moving into kind of the midfield three that I mentioned earlier, one player that has to be in this Ghana midfield three, you know who it is, it's Thomas Parte. Now, once again, one of those players that struggles with injuries from time to time. He currently has a thigh injury, but should be ready for the World Cup. And he's not a player I really have to justify why he has to be in the squad. As we know, on most days, he is the MVP for this team. He's created a lot of chances for Ghana. Obviously, when he plays for Arsenal, when he is match fit, once again, he makes a world of difference to that team. I mean, he's the reason why Arsenal can probably party most days. As we know, a solid, reliable defensive midfielder that can still make his way up the pitch and absolutely needs to be within this team. Now, the other midfielder I've got before looking at our attacking midfielder, once again, guys, hear me out because I know this is going to be a big shout, but I've gone for Amate. Now, once again, as I mentioned a tiny bit earlier, I don't believe that he's good enough to get into this defense of the Ghanaian national team. Now, yes, I know that means that maybe I could even leave him on the bench, but looking at him, he's played in that defensive midfielder role for quite a few times for Leicester City, and although they haven't been that great over the last season or two, as we know, on his day, although he's not that great defensively, his passing ability is okay. He can be reliable when he plays slightly higher up on the pitch, and if he's got a solid defense behind him, I believe that takes less pressure off of him, or more pressure off of him, and I do believe that he'll be in a more consistent space, if I can call him that. Once again, if you put him in a defensive midfield role with someone like Thomas Partey, I believe that could be a very solid defensive partnership. Now, of course, moving on to the attacking midfielder, once again, it has to be Kudus. Now, he is one of those players, I mean, I thought the only Kudu you got out there was the kind of back, but I mean, Kudus, at 22 years old, has really made a name for himself in the last few games. At the time of recording, he scored 4 goals in the last 4 games for both Ajax, or I don't know what I mean by for both Ajax. In Ajax, for both the Eredivisie and the Champions League, scoring 2 goals in 2 Champions League games so far. I mean, even in terms of the Ghanaian national team, 5 goals in 16 games already at just 22 years old. This man is going to be an absolute machine, absolute monster for Ghana, and I think we could be looking at ourselves at a Ghanaian Kevin De Bruyne at this rate. I mean, in terms of his attacking ability, he seems to be at a whole new level this season, and once again, I think this is the season where he truly starts to shine. I mean, as I said, already 5 goals for Ghana. I think he's going to be a really special player and might be Ghana's most deadliest player in the World Cup. Now, of course, moving on to our final 3 players. As I said, our left winger slash midfielder plus our right winger slash midfielder. On the left hand side, I've gone for good old captain Andre Ayew. And on the right wing side, I know they don't have him yet, but Callum Hatsunodoim. Now, of course, talking about Callum Hatsunodoim quickly for a second here. As I said, yes, I know He hasn't quite been added to this Ghanaian national team there. And don't forget, guys, this isn't my prediction of what I think the team will look like for the World Cup. This is what I believe the best possible team for the World Cup is. And if they're able to get a player like Callum Hatsunodoim, it would be absolutely massive. I mean, you look at a player like Callum Hatsunodoim, in terms of his attacking ability, his absolute pace, in terms of his skill, he's a very intelligent player, out on loan at Bayer Leverkusen this season. I know his numbers aren't absolutely massive, but we seem to forget how young he is. I mean, he's been playing at a top level for Chelsea for 4-5 years, and he's still only 21 years old. Once again, I believe he's going to get a lot more game time at Bayer Leverkusen, and I believe that's what he kind of needs to break through, to become that breakout player. He hasn't been getting the necessary game time at Chelsea, and this loan move will turn him into a whole new player. And if Ghana are able to get a player like him, it could be absolutely massive. Now, of course, going from one really young player to a more experienced veteran, as I said, we've got ayew on the left wing side, which, I mean, the nation's second top goal scorer of all time. Of course, when looking at the African Cup of Nations, he was probably their standout star when it came to attacking chances. I mean, when absolutely no attacking chances are able to be made by the rest of the team, this man seems to pull it out of his pocket, pulls it out of a magic hat, because he can produce something out of nothing. Obviously playing in Qatar, so he's kind of used to the climate at the moment. And looking at him, only 2 goals in the first 6 games for the season so far. Once again, it's very early days, so it's kind of hard to judge off of that. But last season, 15 goals in 21 games. And as I said, watching him for this Ghanaian national team, he is a true talent. Once again, a very ruthless player, and does what he needs to do to get the job done. And if you got him on one side and you've got Callum Hatsunodoim on the other side, once again, magic will happen. And of course, that takes us to our striker position, where once again, this was a very, very tricky decision to make. I even asked you guys on my community tab what you guys think, but it is between the likes of Anarchy Williams and of course Nketiah. Once again, very difficult decision, but I've gone for Anarchy Williams. Once again, you look at a player like him, he's quite experienced, and although he's not a lethal goal scorer, he's not going to get 20 goals a season in the Liga. As we know, a very, very reliable attacker, and I think goals will come his way if he's got a player like Kudus behind him, if you've got ayew on one side and Hatsunodoim on the other side. And even if he doesn't get the goals, he is a striker that works well with other players, that works well off of other players, and will even be able to provide assists for players like that. Once again, I was very close to choosing Nketiah, and to be honest, if he does get game time, I might put him over someone like Anarchy Williams. As we know, looking at someone like Nketiah, he is a top quality player, but hasn't gotten that much game time this season for Arsenal, obviously with Gabriel Jesus being added to the squad. Hopefully he does get more game time, but as I said, I think looking at Anarchy Williams with his absolute pace up front could be a whole different story. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, that is what I believe is the best possible starting 11 Ghana should use heading into this World Cup. As I said, don't forget to comment down below what nation you want me to talk about next. Of course, don't forget to subscribe if you're not subscribed, and don't forget to like down below. Can we get this video to 20 likes? But of course, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for today's video. I hope that you have enjoyed. This has been fun. Until next time, cheers.